Firstly, I want to just say a little bit about the wonderfully successful community campaign there was in Lewisham to save Lewisham Hospital. It was absolutely magnificent achievement, because what had happened is with Lewisham Hospital, it was a well-run local hospital. Its finances were sound. It wasn't saddled in debt. It had a PFI extension, but only a very small part of it, so it wasn't saddled in PFI debt. Its finances were in the black. Unfortunately, there was a neighbouring hospital in a neighbouring trust that, because of PFI debt, was suffering deep financial problems, and because it had a long-term PFI contract, the government couldn't consider closure of that, although obviously any closure of a hospital is deeply regrettable. But the government couldn't consider closure of that because it would be too difficult. So it was easy to close Lewisham or to downgrade the services at Lewisham because its finances were secure and it was well run, so it was easier to secure. And that's the madness of NHS financing in the 21st century. However, the local community stood up and said very loudly and vociferously, this is not acceptable. This is not going to happen. There was a challenge to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State for Health, Jeremy Hunt, was found by the High Court to be acting beyond his powers, and that it meant that the services at Lewisham Hospital that were threatened, both the accident and emergency and maternity services, were secure thanks to that ruling. So what are the lessons from that magnificent victory for the people of Lewisham? Firstly, I think we had a united community, and in a day sometimes you say there's so much apathy around and you can't get people along to meetings or demonstrations. There were tens of thousands of people out on the streets of Lewisham, marching through Lewisham on several occasions to defend their hospital and make their voice heard. So it was a very active, very vocal community that worked together. There was cross-party support for the hospital as well, which was really important. I think during the actual period of the campaign, there was a recognition that simply point scoring wasn't going to secure victory in the High Court, and that even if politicians of different political persuasions detested one another on a day-to-day basis, that they did need to work together and put on a united front to save the hospital. So I think that was another lesson. And thirdly, there was a very strong legal case, and the officers at Lewisham Council who worked with the local community campaigners in putting the legal challenge together did an absolutely magnificent job in putting together a really strong cast-iron case against the Secretary of State for Health and speaking up for the hospital. And there was every vote on the hospital that we had in Lewisham Council was passed unanimously, and it was actually one of the best officer reports I'd ever read that had come before Lewisham Council, the legal case to secure the future of the hospital. So some absolutely brilliant example of effective community campaigning. So don't ever think that there's that the battle's already over, that you're going through the motions. There is a real opportunity if people get together to actually stand up and say no. Now we will come on to the clause. I'm sure the other speakers are going to talk about that. The clause that the government is trying to put through now to stop any future communities like Lewisham rising up and telling the Health Secretary, no, we don't want our hospital closed. And it is really, really important that we fight this clause 118. It's now clause 119, which would give the Secretary of State for Health new powers, direct powers to intervene and close close hospitals. So just before I hand on to our main speakers tonight, I just thought I'd sum up on some of the key principles behind green thinking on health. And so what are they? Firstly, absolutely being very, very clear about reversing the privatisation of the NHS and being very, very clear that private healthcare providers have no place in our National Health Service. That's clearly a key part of our policy. Secondly, to ensure adequate funding. That we don't have hospitals facing financial crisis and so on. The PFI situation has caused numerous disasters across the country, but adequate public funding rather than the ridiculous PFI mechanisms have got to be the future securing our health service. Thirdly, local accountability, absolutely pivotal, and we do see a role for local government, for elected local government, in ensuring proper local accountability of the NHS in their area. It's interesting, isn't it, that the government are so blasé about relaxing their control over the NHS. In so many areas, they're happy to let private healthcare providers come in. They're happy to see all forms of privatisation, and apparently be so hands-off and relaxed about how the NHS is run until it comes to closing hospitals, and then the Secretary of State wants new powers to be able to make it easier to close hospitals, which is why simply relying on top-down decision-making isn't right. We do need proper local accountability for the NHS at the local level. And finally, one of the things that Greens have always said, of course, we want a properly resourced, properly accountable, publicly run and publicly owned NHS. That absolutely goes without saying. But it's not simply about the NHS. We've always striven for a healthier society, and indeed for preventative health work within the NHS as well. So all our work on tackling poverty, tackling pollution, ensuring decent housing conditions, ensuring people have jobs and opportunities, these are absolutely essential building blocks to creating a healthy society. So a healthy society isn't just about a decent, well-funded, properly accountable NHS. That's an absolutely necessary part of the equation, but it is not the only part. I think that just gives a nice, hopefully nice summing up on some green principles on health before we move to our main speakers. Thank you.
Thanks.